All right, folks, I want to welcome you to Pastor's Point of View number 178. Today is September the 3rd, 2021. My name is Dr. Andy Woods, flying solo today, but we're going to just jump right into it. Here is our outline for our prophecy update, and obviously the first of 7 things that we want to talk about very quickly is Afghanistan. I would encourage people to go back and review Pastor's Point of View, the prior 2 we've done, 176 and 177, because there we made the case that we think Afghanistan is prophetically significant. Here is our map of the Battle of Gog and Magog in the end times, and you'll notice one of those invaders, you'll find this in Ezekiel 38, is the name Magog. We believe that Magog is one of the sons of Japheth, one of Noah's sons, so this would make Magog Noah's grandson. And Josephus essentially tells us where Magog settled. He tells us that Magog is the group of people called the Scythians. Some pronounce that the Scythians. And essentially we know that the Scythians migrated from Central Asia to southern Russia about the 8th to the 7th century BC. So we think Magog is a group of people that we call Central Asia. You know, if you remember that map we had up earlier, Central Asia would include Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, also the Ukraine, and you could put into that mix also Afghanistan. So when America very hastily and very sloppily leaves that region or that part of the world in such a way that the Taliban takes over immediately and is Islamicized, not just Islamicized, but militarized, thanks to the United States and how she bungled this and handled this, then we believe that this is all something that is happening in fulfillment of the Gog-Magog invasion. And therefore, we believe that the things that are happening in Afghanistan that you've been watching in the news the last couple of weeks are prophetically significant from that standpoint. Western influence in Afghanistan gone. Militant Islamic influence in Afghanistan is now there. And now that group that's Islamicized that part of the world, thanks to the Taliban, is militarized thanks to what the United States has just done. And therefore weapons from the United States are now in the hands of those people to use them to attack America, American allies, and the nation of Israel. And that's the significance prophetically, we believe, of what is happening currently in Afghanistan. In fact, here's a screenshot that we used in our prior Pastor's Point of View. I believe this is from Fox News, and it reveals, based on how America has handled this, all of the American weaponry that's been left behind in Afghanistan. $85 billion in U.S. funding to the Afghan army has been left behind. 75,000 vehicles, 600,000 weapons, and 200 aircraft. And anybody with basically 2 brain cells to rub together, even people that don't have military expertise, knows that this is how you do not handle a pullout. I mean, the very first thing you do when you pull out is you get the civilians, American citizens, Americans, and American allies out first. Number 2, you remove all of the weapons that were in that part of the world. And if you can't remove them, you destroy them, burn them, whatnot. And then finally, number 3, you take your own military out. and the Biden administration, for whatever reason, did not do it that way. It's almost like they did everything in reverse. So now there are as many as, and I've heard estimates this high, 1,000 Americans caught behind enemy lines. And there's somewhere between 1,000 to 4,000 Afghan allies that were helping our cause over there, trapped behind enemy lines. And now they're in a situation to be hunted, targeted, tracked down, and executed by the Taliban. And so the whole thing has been completely and totally mismanaged. And in spite of all of these things going on, what's sort of new about it is the Biden administration is taking a victory lap. You know, they're acting as if what they've done over there is some kind of big success, which really takes your breath away. That's the steep and thick level of propaganda that we are being spoon-fed over this whole thing. You notice this article by Joe Pollack from Breitbart News. The title of it is "The Democratic National Committee, the DNC, declares victory for Biden in Afghanistan." Let me read to you a little bit of this article. It says the DNC issued a press release on Tuesday praising President Joe Biden for his actions in Afghanistan, noting that tens of thousands had been evacuated in recent days without any reported U.S. casualties. The press release issued by the DNC's War Room is printed below, and let me read to you a paragraph from this because this is so outrageous. It's hard to know where to begin. It says, President Biden defies expectations again, as if this is another one of his victories, delivers results in Afghanistan. President Biden has defied expectations and exceeded even his own administration's goal in successfully ramping up evacuations from Afghanistan. Not only has President Biden evacuated nearly 60,000 people from Kabul with no American casualties, but he has taken steps necessary to finally end a 20-year-long war, bring Americans home, and keep our promise to our Afghan partners. This is what the Democratic National Committee has printed out in light of the recent events there in Afghanistan. So they're taking a failure and they're trying to spin it as a success. MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell, who basically is nothing more than a useful idiot, quite frankly, for the Democratic Party, he's been that way for years, trumpeted this, quote, "This is the best run evacuation from a war America lost," close quote. And the Joe Pollack article that I was referencing earlier concludes very appropriately with these words. He says the press release ignored the chaos of the withdrawal, the collapse of the Afghan military, the failure to communicate with U.S. allies, the stranding of U.S. citizens, as many as 1,000, by the way, the seizure of billions of dollars in U.S. weaponry, and the blow to U.S. prestige, close quote. And I would just say this, if this is somehow a success nationally, I would hate to see what a failure looks like. But that's what we're being told today. That up is down and down is up and black is white and white is black and left is right and right is left. It reminds me very much of what the prophet Isaiah predicted in chapter 5, verse 20, where the day will come where they will call evil good and good evil. And the truth of the matter is what has happened in Afghanistan is setting the stage prophetically, but from a nationalistic American viewpoint, the whole thing is a catastrophe. It's a debacle. If one American is trapped behind enemy lines, that in and of itself is a failure. And here we have as upwards as 1,000 Americans trapped behind American lines, and as upwards as 4,000 American allies trapped behind American lines. And I think it was the late, not the late, I don't want to push him into the grave too fast, but David Jeremiah, who wrote a book, and the title of it was I Never Thought I'd See the Day. And what a wonderful title to the book. I never thought I'd see the day. And he lists all of the things happening that he thought he would never see happen. And I personally, kind of taking off from that theme just a little bit, I never thought I would see the day where as many as 1,000 Americans left behind would be called a victory. And yet that's what's happened. And I want people to see the propaganda for what it is. It's sort of like what happened to us on November the 3rd, where, I don't know, in the middle of the night, maybe 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, early in the morning the next day, suddenly the voting and the counting stopped concerning the presidential November 2020 election. The voting was stopped simultaneously in key swing states, in key counties of those swing states. And suddenly all of the votes started coming in 100% a mathematical impossibility, not an improbability, an impossibility for Biden. And suddenly those key counties are flipped. And because those key counties are part of key swing states, those states were flipped. Donald Trump loses the election, and Biden then becomes the next president of the United States. And anybody that looks at that says something is not right here. And what we're told by the media is nothing to see here, folks. Don't trust your senses. Don't trust what you see. Trust our script. Trust our narrative. Move right along. And that's exactly what's happening right now with Afghanistan. Yes, the prophetic stage is being set, as we've tried to explain, but this is a complete and total failure. It's a complete and total debacle. And the DNC and MSNBC and Lawrence O'Donnell is trying to take a victory lap. So it's a very dark time in American history. It's a very tragic time. And so the first issue on our list here is Afghanistan, and we wanted to bring these things to your attention. Let's move on here to number 2, which is Iran. Looking back at our map, we believe that Iran, like Magog, is prophetically significant because one of the invaders in the end times will not just be Magog, but will be a country called Persia. You'll see that name or these names, Magog and Persia, in Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 through 17. And we believe that Persia is Iran. In fact, I think Persia is probably the easiest name to identify here on Ezekiel's list because Persia is found in the Bible. There's a nation that plays a great role in biblical history called Persia. Persia became a modern country, and in 1935 the name Persia was changed to Iran, and then in 1979 something happened in Iran which is almost identical to the type of thing that we're seeing right now in Afghanistan, where Iran became Islamicized and the Shah was toppled in 1979 and replaced by the Ayatollah. So we think Iran, along with Magog, is also prophetically significant. And what's very important to understand as you study world events is don't focus so much on the area of the world that everyone else is focused on. When the attention of the world is somewhere like Afghanistan, look at what's going on elsewhere. And if you look at what's going on elsewhere, you keep your eye on the ball. And when you take your eyes off Afghanistan just for a minute and look to nearby Iran, you'll see Iran is fitting into prophetic orbit, exactly like Afghanistan is. So you'll notice that we have an article here from the Jerusalem Post. by a staff writer. The title of it is Iran's Raisi names wanted mass murderer of 85 Argentinians as VP for economics. Quote, Iran is clearly seeking to normalize mass murder and is testing the will of the international community, close quote. The article is dated August 26, 2021. Here's a little bit from the article. It says the Islamic Republic of Iran's newly appointed Vice President for Economic Affairs, Minister Moshe Rezai, I think is how you pronounce that, is wanted by the International Criminal Police Organization for the 1994 mass murder of 85 Argentinians at the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. Toby Dershowitz, Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Strategy at the U.S.-based Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who was a longtime analyst of the 1994 AMIA bombing, added that, quote, Iran is clearly seeking to normalize mass murder and is testing the will of the international community, close quote. So essentially what's happened in Iran is they have taken a mass murderer and elevated him to a position of political prominence in the government of Iran or the regime of Iran. I mean, what if we did that in the United States? What if all of a sudden you learned that somebody who was responsible for the mass murder of 85 people, I think in this case it was 85 people in a Jewish community in Buenos Aires, I mean, what if all of a sudden they became a lead member of our cabinet in the United States? There'd be an outcry, at least there should be. And that's the kind of thing that's happening in Iran as we speak. In other words, Iran is testing the will of the international community by normalizing a mass murderer. And Iran is making absolutely no attempt any longer to pretend that she is moderate. Now, I remember when Ahmadinejad was in power, and he was making all kinds of crazy, insane statements, and he was replaced by Rouhani, and the world community, the world press at that time saying, it's okay, Iran is going moderate. Don't worry about the nukes that she's trying to get her hands on. Don't worry about the nuclear weapons that she's trying to build. After all, Iran is now moderate. And when Rouhani was replaced by Raisi, those days ended, and now Raisi is putting into place Moshe Rezai, or Razii, if I'm pronouncing that right, who is a mass murderer. And my point is, Iran is making absolutely no attempt whatsoever to pretend to be moderate. And what does that tell you? It tells you that Iran is getting very close to achieving her goal of going nuclear. As long as the world community thought that she was moderate, everybody would sort of leave her alone. But now she's not even pretending to be moderate anymore by promoting someone who has blood on his hands and is a mass murderer to the tune of 85 individuals this person murdered. So what that tells me is Iran is very, very close to going nuclear, to the point where she's not even trying to fool the world community anymore. She's not even trying to deceive the world community anymore. She's right out there in the open. And that's what you find with a lot of these diabolical world leaders. As they are within a millimeter of accomplishing their goals, they become very, very transparent. And so keep your eye on Iran. Keep your eye on Afghanistan. Because from a prophetic standpoint, things are not falling apart. They're actually falling into place. Let's move to our third category, which also relates to the Middle East, and it has to do with Babylon. Here is a map with a circle around an area called Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers, between the Euphrates and the Tigris. The Hebrew name for that area is Shinar. The Greeks called it Mesopotamia, meaning Meso between, Potamia as in Potomac. You might recognize the word Potomac as in rivers, between the rivers. And we believe that part of the world is prophetically significant. We believe, based on a literal interpretation of Bible prophecy, that that's where the Antichrist's kingdom will be controlled from. So anything concerning Babylon in the news is a big deal. And accidentally, very happenstance, providentially, I did produce a book. The book is less than 100 pages. It has an extensive bibliography. It also has a clear presentation of the gospel at the end. And the title of it is Babylon, the Prophetic Bookends of History. You can find this on Amazon. You can find it also at Dispensational Publishing House. And if you have any question marks in your mind concerning the role that Babylon is destined to play in prophetic history, I would encourage you to take a look at that book. It gives you the biblical evidence why Babylon means Babylon in Bible prophecy. And so Babylon, just like Afghanistan, just like Iran, Mesopotamia, Baghdad, Babylon would be about 58 miles south of Baghdad, is a part of the world you always want to be watching, because God says that part of the world is going to play a major role in the end times drama. We did a pastor's point of view. I don't remember the exact number, but if you go back into the archives, you can see we did a pastor's point of view on how the Pope, not long ago, called for a kind of a world religions conference, and he decided not to have that meeting in Vatican City, but he decided to have that meeting in Ur of the Chaldeans, which is this basic Babylonian region that we're speaking of here. And we said that is prophetically significant. It is stage setting for the end time drama. So along that vein, or along that similar note, we have this article from Seth Frantzman, August 28th, 2021. Notice the title of this article. It says Baghdad Conference. Now keep in mind, Baghdad is just 58 miles south of Babylon. Or I should say Babylon is 58 miles south of Baghdad. That's the city that's destined to play this massive role in the end times. Baghdad Conference is seen as a regional turning point. Iraq Neighborhood Summit boasts wide international and regional participation and great hopes for the return of Iraq's historical role in the region. This is from the Jerusalem Post. And let me, if I could, quote a little bit from this article. It says, a unique conference in Baghdad held on Saturday is supposed to bring together key regional officials and leaders, including the president of France, who is visiting the Iraqi capital, the Egyptian president, and Jordan's King Abdullah II have said they plan to attend. Macron of France. Macron's plane has flown in overnight. The regional press see this as an important meeting. Jordan's All God newspaper called it a turning point. Baghdad will host the Iraq Neighborhood Summit with wide international and regional participation and great hopes for the return of Iraq's historical role in the region, local media say. The conference is supposed to show that Baghdad can now bring the region together. The official added, the conference sends positive messages to the institutions concerned with economic development and attracting capital. The summit aims to give a constructive and inclusive role to address the crises afflicting the region, this particular leader says. End of article, close quote. Now you read something like this, and if you understand Bible prophecy, it shouldn't surprise you at all that all of a sudden Baghdad Mesopotamia, Shinar, modern-day Iraq, is now the headquarters for these big political regional meetings, the ambition to restore greatness to that part of the world. Exactly why the Pope, as we reported a few PPOVs back, decided to have a one world religions conference in that part of the world. If you understand Bible prophecy, it shouldn't shock you at all, because Bible prophecy demands that that part of the world is going to play a massive role in the end times. People criticize this view quite frequently, and they say, oh, come on, that part of the world isn't prominent enough yet to play the kind of end times role that you're speaking of. And my basic response to this, and I try to cover this in the book, is just think pre-May the 14th, 1948. Everybody that interpreted Bible prophecy literally, which is what we're doing with these prophecies concerning Babylon, everybody that interpreted Bible prophecy literally argued that Israel is destined to play a central role in the end times drama. People said, there's nothing going on in that part of the world. And then boom, May the 14th, 1948, everything changes. And now look at Israel today. And look at how Israel is now the center of world attention. What we are suggesting, what we are arguing from God's word, God cannot lie, and interpreting it literally, that similarly Babylon is destined to play a massive role in the end times drama. And so concerning this Jerusalem Post article and this meeting in Baghdad, wanting to boost Iraq's presence in that part of the world, that is not happenstance, that is not coincidental, that is not accident. What you're seeing in Iran and its radicalization, what you're seeing in Afghanistan in terms of its radicalization, and what you're seeing in Iraq is all stage setting for the end times. And these things tell us the season or the time period that we find ourselves in. Let's go from there to some domestic things happening at home and also abroad. We move into this whole category called religious exemption. And it has to do with, well, I'll explain it in just a minute, but notice, first of all, Daniel chapter 7 and verse 23. Notice what Daniel 7 and verse 23 says. The fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. What the Bible predicts concerning the end of the age is essentially totalitarianism in the form of one world government will envelop the entire planet. And the idea of individual rights, personal rights, inalienable rights, rights that come from God and not man, that idea will disappear very fast. And this one world tyranny will come into existence. And I think that you're starting to see that develop through this coercion of individuals to take the jab. We're now in a situation where people are being coerced against their will to ingest into their bodies an experimental drug. And if that is not a destruction of private rights, individual rights, inalienable rights, I don't know what is. I've heard from time immemorial the left saying concerning abortion, my body, my choice. And you'll notice how this is rapidly disappearing. That concept of my body, my choice is rapidly disappearing concerning this whole subject of the jab, etc. Here's something. I thought this was kind of humorous. It's a Market Watch screenshot from Twitter, and it says this: Krispy Kreme is doubling its jab incentive. Soon, Americans showing a valid jab card can get 2 free donuts a day. Get the sweet deal here, it says. And then at the bottom it says, get the jab and get a free Krispy Kreme donut every single day this year. So the jab, I guess, is supposed to make us all healthy. And go ahead and get the jab and you'll be healthy, but we're going to take away your health by giving you 2 free donuts a year, which are probably going to just stop up your arteries. So it just shows you the craziness that people are going through and to get people to take this jab. They want everybody to receive this jab, to the point where if you have a religious objection to it, a moral objection to it, the idea that it's my body, my choice, it's to the point now where that right no longer exists. That is the creeping tyranny of the one world fascism, which Daniel 7 verse 23 predicts for the end of the age. It's becoming terrible in certain parts of the world. You'll notice this screenshot from the Toronto Sun. It mentions this person called Ford, and Ford is the premier of Ontario, Toronto. And it says Ford gives green light to revised jab passport starting September 22nd, which is just a few weeks away in terms of the date of this recording. And it says you'll need it at restaurants, bars, gyms, and other indoor settings. The title of this article from the Toronto Sun is It's Come to Pass. In other words, you better get the jab. And you better be able to show proper documentations that you've received the jab. And if you haven't, these are all the areas of life that you're going to be cut out of. You can't go to restaurants, you can't go to bars, you can't go to gyms, you can't even go to any other indoor setting. Now, one of the things that's really hot right now is people have asked, well, gee whiz, isn't there a religious exemption that people can get in terms of taking the jab? And there are a lot of very fine ministries out there that have put out religious exemption letters that you can sort of download and sign and turn those into your employer, and somehow you get an opportunity based on a religious conviction to avoid the jab. And I'm here to tell you that that religious exemption is rapidly disappearing. I get this from LifeSite News, August 30th, 2021. It's an article by Ashley Sadler. And the title of the article is as follows: New York ends religious exemption for the jab mandate. 450,000 healthcare workers affected. Healthcare employees in the state must take the experimental injection or face termination regardless of religious objections. In other words, if you're in the group that's being spoken of here, you better take the jab or you can lose your job, and it really doesn't matter what religious objections you have to this. Religious objections are being swept away. So the article is a little long, and I don't think I have time to read all of it, but let me read just a little bit here. It says healthcare workers in the state of New York are ordered to get the jab and will not have the option of religious exemption thanks to emergency authorization passed late last week. The article goes on and it says, in passing the measure, the board also scrubbed the option of a religious objection. Now, why would anybody have a religious objection to taking the jab? Well, it's very simple. The Bible teaches, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 19, that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And this is being rushed through so fast, it's being rushed through so quickly, that it's really not a vaccine. It is experimental. And it takes time to determine with any jab concerning whether side effects are going to show up. And as long as we're moving so fast on this and we're in Operation Warp Speed on this subject, there's no time to determine if side effects are going to be there or not. And so anybody who believes that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit does not want to ingest into their body this substance which could be damaging to them. Now, LifeSite News has also talked about the fact that this jab is abortion tainted. This particular article goes on and it says, since all of the jab injections currently on the market have close ties with abortion. It talks here about aborted babies, and it talks about how the contents for the jab was derived from retinal tissue taken from an 18-week-old baby who was aborted in the Netherlands in 1985 and reduced to a fetal cell line in 1995. The article goes on and it says the Department of Health, DOH, attorney Vanessa Murphy said no facilities in the state will be permitted to offer religious exemptions moving forward. This attorney, representing the government in New York, says we're not constitutionally required to provide a religious exemption. There's a lot of people out there that think if you take the jab, you're contributing to abortion, and abortion goes against the Word of God. I realize there's a medical debate on this, but my authority for this is this article from LifeSite News. And so someone could make an honest religious objection on the fact that their body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, number one. And number two, they don't want to contribute to the process and progress of abortion. Those are reasonable religious beliefs that should allow people an exemption. Well, here comes the state of New York saying, all done, all gone, no more exemption. Now, I realize this is only in New York, but it won't be long until this mentality spreads across the country, if not the world. And this is the creeping voice, if you will, the creeping reality of totalitarianism, where individual rights disappear and we all have to sort of acquiesce or submit ourselves to the global governing philosophy of the day. By the way, as we covered in our prior PPOV, you'll have to go back to PPOV number 177 to get the information on this. We covered very briefly in the state of California AB 455, which was supposedly a transportation bill, which is now in the process of being gutted and amended. And it's now on the precipice of being foisted on the citizens of the great state of California, my home state. I currently reside in Texas, but I'm from California. And it basically says if you haven't received the jab and if you don't have the proper paperwork or passport in place to receive the jab, then you're essentially going to be cut out of going to public places, which would include being cut out of life. Grocery store shopping, going to the theaters, going to the show. In other words, you are about to become a second-class citizen. So this is happening in New York as the religious exemption is being swept away. It's happening also in California, the two outer edges of our country, two very blue states. And this is all the face and the voice of creeping, what we would call creeping totalitarianism. The nice thing about the situation in California is they can actually do something about it, because the governor who is pushing all of these things is on the ballot to be recalled September the 14th. And if more people want him recalled than don't want him recalled, then he's removed from office. And on that same ballot, you're going to have the opportunity to vote for someone that you think would be a suitable replacement. I think there's about 40 names there. And whoever collects the most names becomes the next governor of California. And as you're thinking about voting and casting an intelligent vote in that election, if you're a resident in the state of California, you want to ask yourself, what are these other potential governors going to do with AB 455? Because California has the ability to stop this totalitarianism. Governor Newsom aggressively pushing all of these things. And the Golden State has a golden opportunity. September the 14th, by simply showing up and voting for his recall to stop creeping totalitarianism. So we should always fight back against totalitarianism. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. And yet, at the same time, we know that things are not falling apart. They're falling into place because the stage is being set for the type of tyranny of the end times spoken of in the book of Daniel, chapter 7 and verse 23. Let's move to our fifth area, if we could, which has to do with the public school system. You always want to pay attention to what's going on in the public schools, because a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln reads as follows: "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." And we now have a situation with an AP government teacher. And here we have a screenshot of it where you can actually go to this Twitter feed and watch him being caught on camera saying these things. It says, breaking: California high school AP government teacher admits communist indoctrination of students. He says here in this particular video, "I have an Antifa flag on my classroom wall. I have 180 days to turn them," that's the students, "into revolutionaries. There's a reason why these kids, Gen Z, are becoming further left," close quote. That's exactly what Lincoln said. The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. If you want to know why our country is tilting leftward, look no further than incidents like this taking place in the public school system. In fact, here is an article from Conservative News Daily, September 1st, just a couple of days ago, 2021. The title of it is, "Watch, San Diego teacher admits he bribes students with extra credit to attend Antifa events." So the article says, and I don't have time to read all of it, but just very briefly, it says, now in a viral video, a San Diego area teacher, that's the person we're speaking of here, bribes his students with extra credit to attend Antifa events. This particular person's name is Gabriel Gipe. And the article goes on and says Gipe is a teacher, and it names the school district he's involved with. In the video, Gipe admits to having an Antifa flag and Mao Zedong poster in his classroom. And here he boasts that this scares the students in hopes of turning them into revolutionaries. I have 180 days to turn them into revolutionaries. And it talks here about how students are granted extra credit to attend Antifa events. He says, "My wife and I have been political organizers, and I've been organizing since I was 13. He says, "I'm probably as far left as you can go." He says, "I have an Antifa flag on my wall." And he says he gives them at the end of the year an ideology quiz. And every year they get further and further left. There is reason why Generation Z, these kids, are becoming further and further left. So that's a little bit about what's going on in our public schools. We're going to stop right here, and we're going to pick this up because of time constraints at a later point. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.